All right. Well, hello. And then we're back again. And I hope I have sound because this is take two. And of course, you know that whenever I think there's a take one, take two is never very good. So it is what it is. Okay. So we are starting a new series tonight. Okay. Which is when good people go toxic. And the reason we're starting that series and why I think it's so important that we talk about toxicity from a real perspective, from a how does it get started, what happens, and how do people become toxic. I just think that's super super important. And one of the reasons I think that is because we have lot of misconceptions and ideas about what bullying is, who can become a bully, and how things go from healthy to conflict to toxicity and bullying. Okay, those things are not all the same. We have a tendency to use this word toxicity, which is the word I'm going to use, but all of those things are different. Healthy, of course, is different. Conflict is different. Toxicity is different. And bullying is different. They're kind of on a spectrum, so to speak. And when we think of workplace bullying, we have a tendency and we generalize and we think that bullies are like the schoolyard bully. We stereotype they're big, they're loud, and easy to pick out in a crowd. And the reality is that could not be further from the truth. Is that most of the time when people come into the workplace, they're coming in there to do their job. I don't know that most people, now of course I could be wrong, come into the workplace and say, I feel like being a jerk and I really want to make my colleagues' lives miserable because I just do, that's how I am. That's not generally how it happens. It's that you become toxic, you become a bully, and you wear that crown after you have morphed into, again, from a good person into a toxic or bullying person. And the other thing I think too is we have a tendency to view people as one or the other. You're either a good person at work or you're a bad person. You're either somebody who doesn't bully or you're somebody who does bully. And that also couldn't be further from the truth. It's a spectrum. It's a pendulum that swings back and forth. The reality is every workplace is stressful. Every workplace is, has some stress that you have to deal with. And workplace stress is part of everyday work life. So if you're a social worker like I was, or a police officer, or a teacher, or a person working at a store or a restaurant, or you're providing a service, whatever it is you're doing, in all the jobs that you could possibly be doing, there's a certain level of stress that your job brings. That's part of what I call everyday work life. Okay, so that's kind of the bottom thing, right? And again, everybody's work stress is different. And everybody's work stress is different depending on your role in the workplace. So if you're a new hire, you have a different level of stress than somebody who's been there for 25 years, or your supervisor, or your boss, or your boss's boss, right? All of those different hierarchies and the roles in your workplace have different levels of stress. Toxicity, conflict, toxicity, bullying adds a layer, a thicker layer. Of course, as it goes from conflict to toxicity to bullying, a thicker layer of cement on top of that basic layer of stress that lays on you and adds additional pressures to you. Okay? And so my series, when good people go toxic, okay, how workplace stress turns ugly, is a 5-part series. So this is series 1, part 1 today, right? Where we're just going to talk about what the series is about and just give you a little bit of what happens when we're, with workplace stress and who we are. Okay. And this is really just a setting the stage up for the rest of the next 4 weeks where we'll be together talking about workplace when good people go toxic. Next week, we're going to talk about the snowball effect, how microaggressions can escalate, right? So you can start having some issues in the workplace. You can feel kind of icky and yucky. And pretty soon, those little microaggressions, they become bigger and bigger and bigger as the snowball gets pushed down the mountain. Okay, it becomes bigger and bigger and more problematic. And why that happens is what we'll talk about. Okay. And then on this week 3 or series 3, episode 3, we're going to talk about how microaggressions, toxicity, and bullying even become normalized into our work culture, how those begin to be something that made the hair on the back of our neck stand up, which are now just normal everyday work. And how it becomes part of what we accept in our workplace when we are exposed to different levels of toxicity and abuse and bullying. How it doesn't even bother us or faze us. And then in week 4, we're going to talk about when good people are engaging in bad behavior and how they slip into toxicity. How you go from being a good colleague to a bad colleague, and how that process, how you morph into that over time, and how that all of us, okay, no one is not included in this, that there is the risk and potential, we all have it in us to be the colleague that the bully, no one wants to be around. Okay. But and then week 5, we're gonna look at some of the red flags and some of the things that you can look at in yourself, how you can feel those slipping away, how you can feel yourself wanting to become or engaging in more toxicity than you would have ever thought you were capable of. And the reality is what we do know about workplace bullying and toxicity is we often seek out other people to help us stop it, because we believe that people like HR, we believe that our supervisors, that their job is to stop toxicity and bullying. And the reality is, yes, people should stop it. 9 times out of 10, I might even say 9.5 times out of 10, they will not, because they are part of the problem. They are part of how good people go bad, okay, to toxicity. And so the reality is, if we want to have a healthy work environment, the first step really does start with us being a healthy colleague. If you have a group of healthy colleagues, the likelihood that you will have a healthy workplace increases. And so we have to learn how to be good colleagues. What is good professional behavior, and how do we spot the signs when we might be stepping over the edge onto the dark side? Okay, because self-awareness and our own personal accountability, ability to self-reflect, and the key here is change, is really important in maintaining healthy work environments. Again, like I said earlier, most people don't walk into a work environment and say, hey, I want to raise hell here. And most of us never thought about looking at how do I operate if I'm in a toxic or bully culture. And the other thing is, when we use those terms like toxicity and bullying and conflict interchangeably, it becomes extremely problematic in how we deal with it, and the level of escalation that happens when you have a conflict issue in your workplace versus a toxic issue in your workplace versus an abusive situation in your workplace. And when we use those terms like toxicity, which I know sometimes I do, I call bullying toxicity, right? It's toxicity on steroids. But when we use those terms interchangeably, as if they are the same, it minimizes the toxicity and the bullying as if it's conflict. And then the interventions that we think will work for those much more complex and deeply embedded problems into our work culture are not ineffective. And in fact, they make it worse. So let's talk about workplace stress, because there's workplace stress no matter where you're working. And depending on the nature of your job depends on your workplace stress, and it even makes you more at risk for bullying and extreme toxicity. So if you are a nurse and you're in an ER setting, which is high pressured, difficult things, seeing things no human being really should ever be seeing, you're doing that for hours on end, then you check out, you punch out, and you come back home, rinse and repeat. You never have time to decompress. Maybe you have a work environment where you're not supported. You might have felt pretty good about your job when you started, but that everyday workplace stress starts to take a toll on who you are and how you feel about your job. And also, there's a lot of other things. I'll just mention a few. Like if you're under resourced, like my profession, social work, it's always under resourced because we don't value my profession and we don't value the services my profession does. And we don't have enough resources, aka money, or we're not willing to advocate or designate enough resources that social work and mental health and places like that, working with the severely mentally ill, people have developmental delays and disabilities, all of those things, right? I mean, domestic violence and rape and all of those things social workers deal with are almost always under resourced. And so you're always trying to cut corners. Your caseloads are always high. You're always having to do more with less. We get rid of people, and today you had one job, tomorrow you have two. And that takes a toll on how you feel as a professional and how you feel about your job. And that causes you to shift as a human being, as a worker or an employee. And sometimes those shifts are subtle. They don't happen overnight. It's like a light switch, right? These shifts in who you are and how you feel about your job change over time due to workplace stress, due to, whether you're supported, how you're decompressing and letting your job go, or et cetera, et cetera. They can have deeply embedded shifts in how you are as a colleague. And soon, again, you walked in as a great colleague. Over time, you are becoming the nurse that nobody likes. You're the social worker that people hate. You're the colleague you swore you'd never be, because workplace stress takes a toll on who you are. And here's the thing again, bullies are often not loud, obnoxious, unlikable people. Again, you're not either a bully or not a bully, right? You're not somebody that people like, or you're not somebody that likes. Bullies can be nice people. They have likable qualities. And so good people do bad things in the workplace. Okay? Part of it is because we shift at who we are as colleagues. Part of it is that we never have a solid foundation of how should I act and behave in the workplace. So if it looks at conflict, for example, okay, yes, people have taken conflict resolution training for decades. However, I can take a lot of training, and trust me, I have. That does not mean I have the skills or ability to apply it to myself or apply it and use it when I need it. Okay, here's another good example. So for example, you can see that I am white, okay? And so, yes, I have white privilege. I have all, built in my DNA of being a white person is racism, right? But that's how white privilege works. Those two things are integrated into my existence, my mere existence of being white. If I go and take a training on diversity, which I have taken a lot of training on diversity, but if I don't see that my whiteness is a problem in how I'm relating to my black and brown colleagues or my indigenous colleagues, and I think I'm treating them fine, however, they feel like I'm not, and I don't have the skills to take the training and absorb it into my DNA and say, oh, when I do this, this is how it makes people who are black and brown feel. I need to change this about who I am and how I react and interact with them so that I'm not making them feel XYZ. If I can't do that, it doesn't make any difference how much diversity training or anti-racist pedagogy I go to. If I can't absorb it into who I am and change how I am acting and behaving. Okay, I hope that makes sense. And that's my thing about conflict. If you can't take conflict resolution and absorb it into your DNA of how you interact with people, conflict resolution training is useless unless you can apply it. For example, I know people in my family who are well educated in communication studies, who are the most passive aggressive people that I have ever interacted with. Because yes, you know how to have quote unquote assertive communication, but you have not absorbed that into their DNA, and so how they interact is still what they feel comfortable with, which is passive aggressiveness. And so we have to teach people how to be professionals, and we have to make sure that they can absorb it and use it when necessary. And so when we look at the workplace and we look at the layers of stress, we have that normal kind of work stress. When toxicity begins to weave itself into the culture and come into play in your workplace, how that ordinary stress, it changes how we are able to manage that ordinary stress. So then when we can't manage the ordinary stress as well as we would have liked to or wanted to, ordinary stress can become the breeding ground for toxicity. Okay? And when toxicity begins to build, at the same time, empathy erodes. First off, we don't have a lot of empathy in our workplace, and we're losing empathy in our personal lives because people believe, okay, that empathy is a weakness. Okay, empathy, if you have the ability to empathize with someone and to see things from their perspective, both in your personal life and in your professional life, empathy is a gift, and not everybody has it, but it is a skill that can be taught and should be taught, especially in particular areas like social work, like nursing, like teaching. Okay, however, I'm going to say my profession does talk about empathy, but we're not teaching the skill of how to practice, and we're not teaching the skill of how to be an empathetic social worker. Talking about empathy, again, teaching the skill and making sure people absorb that into who they are, it's a big It's a big deal, and most people can't do it. And yes, I'm talking about the majority of students I have taught do not have the ability to be empathetic. Okay? So when toxicity increases, stress increases, empathy erodes, okay, trust gets replaced with tension. And so when you walk into the workplace, you're walking into a very bumpy road where you're walking on glass, you're walking on eggshells, and it becomes much more problematic when people enter the mere organizations, because what they're walking into is icky and yucky and difficult. Okay? And so how people respond to that oftentimes is natural. It's a response of defensiveness. It's a response of reactivity, which turns into harm towards our coworkers. Okay? And so if you've ever looked around and thought, how did we get here? How did we go from here to here? Right? Then this is a series that you're going to want to stay around for and stick around for. Because we're going to be really jumping into a lot of things that don't get talked about when it comes to how did we get into this toxic hellhole or this bully environment. So we're really going to dig into the roots of dysfunction in the workplace. I'm not going to beat around the bush and say everything is great. I think that the majority of work cultures that people working in are more toxic and abusive than they've ever been. And also because more people are in the workplace, more people are exposed to that toxicity. And I'm also going to make a bold statement that majority of people we have in positions who can do something about it don't have the skills to do it. But the upside, hopefully we'll get to, is that it doesn't really take all that much if you know what to do and how to do it and how to implement it to get rid of toxicity and bullying from your culture. So hopefully this will be fun. If you have any questions or you'd like me to in whatever question you might have about toxicity, you can email me at jan@stopbullyculture.com, or you can message me here on Facebook, and that's what we're going to talk about. We're really going to jump in and do a deep dive in how we go from being a good coworker to being the one that people absolutely hate. Anyway, so thank you so much for being here. And sorry again, I had technological problems, but we did manage to get it done. And I will try to have my stuff together next week. And I will see you back here next Wednesday for episode 2. Ooh.